She was only 7, but she picked up the phone like she'd done it 100 times. Dialed 911 with hands still small enough to barely grip the receiver. And when the operator answered, she didn't hesitate, just told the truth. "What that?" Little girl said, cracked open a system too, used to looking the other way. And by the time the dust settled, it wasn't just one man under investigation. It was the whole foundation folks had trusted with their children. Before we dive into this, hit the subscribe button and tell us from where in the world you're watching from. Emma Grace Patterson was born on a Sunday morning in spring, when the dogwood trees were dressed in their finest white blooms. Her grandmother Dot always said that made her special Sunday babies got an extra blessing, she'd claim. And looking at that child, with her corn silk hair and eyes the color of summer sky, you'd be inclined to believe it. But by the time she turned 7, those sky-blue eyes had seen too much. They held shadows that no child's eyes should carry. Dot noticed it first, the way grandmothers do. She'd been raising Emma since the girl was 3, after her daughter Emma's. Mama lost her battle with the bottle and the needle. Dot had seen enough heartbreak in her 72 years to recognize when a child's light was dimming. That girl used to laugh like wind chimes, Dot would tell anyone who'd listen. Sweet and bright and free as anything. But lately she jumps at every little sound. Emma lived for her drawings. Lord, could that child create worlds with nothing but crayons and imagination? She'd sit at her little desk for hours, tongue poking out the corner of her mouth in concentration, bringing life to paper. Horses with flowing manes, castles with flags snapping in the wind, families holding hands under rainbow skies. But somewhere around the start of 2nd grade, her drawings changed. The bright colors gave way to darker shades. The smiling faces turned away from the viewer. And more, she drew buses. Yellow buses with dark windows and shadowy figures behind the wheel. "What's this one about, sugar?" Dot asked one September evening, pointing to a particularly troubling sketch. Emma's little hand stilled on her crayon box. "It's nothing, Grandmama. Just ... just a bus." But it wasn't just any bus. It was bus number 217, and behind the wheel sat a figure drawn in heavy black strokes, face obscured, but somehow menacing, even in a 7-year-old's rendering. The thing about children, you see, is they don't lie about fear. They might fib about breaking a lamp or eating cookies before dinner, but when a child draws the same frightening image over and over, when they start having nightmares about yellow metal and dark windows, well, that's their soul trying to tell you something words can't express. Harold Wickham had been driving school buses in Millfield for 15 years. 15 years of perfect attendance, clean driving record, and glowing reviews from parents. He volunteered for field trips, stayed late to help with sports events, and always had a kind word and a piece of candy for the kids. Mr. Harold's the best, parents would say, so patient with the children. Such a blessing to have someone who cares so much. And Harold did care. Oh, he cared very much indeed. But not in the way a school bus driver should. He had a special route, you see. The afternoon route that took him down the winding back roads of Millfield, past the old Miller farm and through the stretch of woods where the cell towers didn't reach too good. It was a longer route than necessary, but Harold claimed it was safer, less traffic, fewer distractions. The school administrators never questioned it. After all, Harold had been doing this job longer than most of them had been, working at the school. If he said the back roads were safer, well, who were they to argue? Emma had been riding Harold's bus since the start of 2nd grade. Her stop was the last one on the route, just her and 2 other kids from the trailer park out on Route 9. The other children got off first, leaving Emma alone with Harold for those final 5 miles to her grandmother's house. 5 miles. In heavy traffic, That might take 15-20 minutes. But on Harold's special route, with its unnecessary detours and frequent stops to check the engine, or let the traffic clear up ahead, those 5 miles could stretch into an hour. An hour alone with a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes. Dot began to notice that Emma was coming home later and later. When she called the school to ask about the delayed routes, they told her there must be some mistake. Bus number 217 was running right on schedule. "Emma, sugar, why are you getting home so late?" Dot asked one crisp October afternoon. Emma's small shoulders hunched up around her ears. "Mr. Harold says there's construction. And sometimes, sometimes the bus breaks down." But there was something in her voice, a tremor that spoke of secrets too heavy for a 7-year-old to carry. Something that made Dot's grandmother instincts prick up like a hound catching a scent. "Does Mr. Harold does he ever ask you to sit up front with him, baby?" Emma's crayon snapped in her small fist. "I don't want to talk about the bus, Grandmama." And there it was. The wall that children build when adults fail them. The silence that settles over young souls when they've learned that their words carry no weight in a grown-up world. Dot tried calling the school again, tried talking to other parents. But Harold Wickham was beloved in Millfield. He sang in the church choir, helped organize the annual Harvest Festival, and had never had so much as a speeding ticket. When Dot suggested there might be something wrong with the way he was running his route, she was met with polite dismissals and barely concealed pity for a grandmother who was clearly seeing problems where none existed. "Children go through phases," the school principal told her. "Emma's adjusting to a new grade, new responsibilities. These behavioral changes are perfectly normal." Normal. That word would haunt Dot for months to come. Because what was happening on bus number 217 was many things, but normal wasn't one of them. October gave way to November, and Emma's light continued to dim. She stopped drawing altogether, stopped laughing at Dot's silly jokes, stopped asking for bedtime stories. She'd come home from school and go straight to her room, emerging only for dinner and baths, her small face carrying the weight of secrets no child should bear. Dot watched her granddaughter disappearing before her eyes, and desperation began to claw at her chest. She'd lost her own daughter to demons. She couldn't fight alcohol and drugs, and men who promised love but delivered only pain. She'd be damned if she'd lose Emma too, especially to something she couldn't even name. "Lord," she prayed every night, kneeling beside her bed the way her own grandmother had taught her, "give me eyes to see what I'm missing. Give me strength to protect this child. And if there's evil lurking in the shadows, shine your light on it so bright it can't hide no more." The answer to that prayer came in the form of Mrs. Sandra Kowalski, whose son Tommy rode bus number 217. Sandra had noticed changes in Tommy too. The 9-year-old had always been a chatterbox, full of stories about his day, eager to share every playground, drama and classroom triumph. But lately he'd grown quiet, withdrawn. He'd started wetting the bed again, something he hadn't done since he was 4. "I don't know what's gotten into him," Sandra confided to her sister over coffee. "He used to love riding the bus," said Mr. Harold, told the best jokes. "Now he begs me to pick him up from school." Her sister, a school counselor in the next county, leaned forward with concern. "Sandy, honey, sudden behavior changes in children, especially regression like bedwetting, that can be a sign of trauma." "Trauma? From what?" "Tommy's life is nothing but school, soccer, and video games. Sometimes trauma comes from places we least expect it, from people we trust." That conversation planted a seed of doubt in Sandra's mind. A seed that grew when she found Tommy's backpack that evening and discovered, tucked between his math homework and a permission slip, a drawing that made her blood run cold. It was crude, the way children's drawings often are, but unmistakable. In its imagery, a large yellow rectangle with wheels, clearly a bus, and inside that bus, two figures. One small, one large. The small figure appeared to be crouched or kneeling, the large figure looming over it. Sandra's hands shook as she held the paper. "Tommy, sweetheart, can you tell Mommy about this drawing?" Tommy's face went white as chalk. "I wasn't supposed to draw that. I wasn't supposed to tell." "Tell what, baby? What weren't you supposed to tell?" But Tommy clammed up, the same way Emma had when Dot asked her questions. The same wall, the same fear, the same terrible silence that children learn when adults fail to protect them. Sandra didn't wait for morning. She called Dot that very night. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Sandra Kowalski, Tommy's mother. I think ... I think we need to talk." They met the next day at the diner on Main Street, two women united by a growing dread they couldn't yet name. Sandra brought Tommy's drawing. Dot brought Emma's bus sketches, and together they spread them across the vinyl table like pieces of a horrific puzzle. "How long has Emma been drawing these?" Sandra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Since September. Getting darker every week. Tommy's been having nightmares. Wakes up screaming about being trapped in a small space." Dot's coffee went cold in her hands. "Emma won't even look at the school bus when it pulls up. Used to wave to Mr. Harold every morning, but now she hides behind the curtain until it's gone." "There's something else," Sandra said, pulling out another piece of paper. "I found this wedged behind Tommy's dresser. He must have tried to hide it." This drawing was even more disturbing. The same bus, the same two figures, but this time there were details that made both women's stomachs lurch. The small figure appeared to have no clothes. The large figure's hands were reaching toward it. "Dear God," Dot whispered. "Sandra, we have to. I know. But who's going to believe us? Harold Wickham is practically a saint in this town." They both knew she was right. Harold's reputation was spotless. He taught Sunday school at First Baptist, organized charity drives, and had never had so much as a complaint filed against him. Two children's drawings and some behavioral changes weren't enough to bring down a pillar of the community. But as they sat in that diner booth, comparing their children's silent screams made manifest in crayon and colored pencil, both women made the same silent vow. They would find a way to protect their babies, no matter what it cost them. They just had no idea how soon that opportunity would come. November 3rd, 2011, dawned gray and cold, with the kind of rain that cuts right through your jacket and settles in your bones. Dot woke with an uneasy feeling she couldn't shake, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon of her soul. Emma barely touched her breakfast, pushing scrambled eggs around on her plate while staring out the kitchen window at the rain. "You feeling all right, sugar?" Dot asked, pressing her hand to Emma's forehead. "I don't want to go to school today, Grandmama." "You sick?" Emma shook her head, but her eyes. Lord, her eyes held a depth of weariness that no 7-year-old should carry. I just don't want to ride the bus today." Dot's heart clenched. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to keep Emma home, to wrap her up safe and never let her out of sight again. But she was a working woman, had to be at the diner by 7:30, or risk losing the job that kept their little household afloat. "Tell you what," she said, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. "How about I pick you up after school today? We'll go get ice cream. Maybe stop by the library for some new books." For just a moment, Emma's face brightened. "Really? Really? No bus ride home today, I promise." But promises, as Dot would learn, are fragile things when evil is determined to have its way. The call came at 3:15. Dot was wiping down tables at the diner when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Patterson? This is Mary from the school office." I'm afraid there's been a mix-up with the pickup list. Emma wasn't on it, so she went ahead and got on the bus as usual. Dot's blood turned to ice water. What? No, I called this morning. I specifically told them, I'm so sorry for the confusion. The message must not have gotten to the right person. But don't worry, Harold will get her home safe. He always does. Harold will get her home safe. Those words echoed in Dot's mind as she threw down her apron and grabbed her keys. She broke every speed limit between the diner and home, praying under her breath the whole way. Please, Lord, please let me get there in time. Please don't let anything happen to my baby girl. But when she pulled into her driveway, the house was empty. No Emma bouncing through the front door with stories about her day. No little shoes kicked off by the entrance. Just silence and the sound of rain against the windows. Dot called the school. They told her bus number 217 had left right on schedule at 3-20-5. She called Sandra Kowalski. Tommy had made it home an hour ago. She called Harold's supervisor. He wasn't available, but his secretary assured her that Harold's route sometimes ran a little long due to weather conditions. By 6 o'clock, when full darkness had settled over Millfield like a shroud, Dot was frantic. She'd driven Harold's usual route twice, seen no sign of the yellow bus or her granddaughter. She'd called everyone she could think of, and everyone kept telling her the same thing. Don't worry, Harold's reliable. Emma will be home soon. But deep in her bones, deeper than reason or hope, Dot knew something was terribly wrong. At 6:47, her phone rang. The number on the screen was her own landline. Hello? She answered with shaking hands. Grandmama? The voice was so small, so broken, that Dot almost didn't recognize it as Emma's. Emma, baby, where are you? I've been so worried. Grandmama, I need help. The words came out in a rush, barely above a whisper. I'm at Mr. Harold's house, and ... and he did it again, Grandmama. He hurt me again. The world tilted sideways. Dot's knees buckled, and she had to grab the kitchen counter to keep feet from falling. Emma, sweetheart, listen to me. Can you get to a door? Can you get outside? He's in the bathroom. I used the phone in the kitchen, but I think he's coming back. Hang up, baby. Hang up right now and call 911. Can you remember that number? 911. I'm scared, Grandmama. I know, sugar. I know you're scared. But you're the bravest little girl in the whole world, and you can do this. Call 911 and tell them exactly where you are and what happened. Can you do that for me? I think so. I love you, Emma Grace, more than all the stars in the sky. Now hang up and call for help. The line went dead, leaving Dot alone in her kitchen with the weight of every grandmother's worst nightmare crushing down on her chest. She tried calling back, but the phone just rang and rang. With hands that wouldn't stop shaking, Dot dialed 911 herself. Officer Jake O'Connor was just finishing up his shift paperwork when the call came in. 23 years on the force, and he thought he'd heard every kind of emergency Millfield had to offer. Domestic disputes, bar fights, the occasional break-in. Nothing that prepared him for the small, terrified voice that came through the dispatch radio at 6:52 p.m. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Emma Patterson, and I'm 7 years old, and the bus driver ... He touched me in his house, and I'm scared. O'Connor's pen stopped moving. In 2 decades of police work, he'd learned to trust his gut, and his gut was telling him this was the call that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Emma, sweetheart, you're being very brave. Can you tell me where you are right now? I'm in Mr. Harold's house. On Sycamore Street, I think. He brought me here after school, and he ... he made me ... The small voice broke off in a sob. O'Connor was already out of his chair, grabbing his radio and keys. "Emma, I need you to find somewhere safe to hide, okay? Can you do that for me?" "He's coming back. I can hear him walking around." "Where are you in the house right now?" "The kitchen. I used the phone when he went to the bathroom, but the sound of footsteps came through the phone, heavy and deliberate." "Emma? Emma, are you there?" "He's here," came the whisper. "He found me." And the line went dead. O'Connor was already in his patrol car, racing through the rain-slicked streets of Millfield, with his lights flashing and his heart pounding against his ribs. He'd been a father himself, had 2 daughters, now grown with children of their own. The thought of what might be happening to little Emma. Patterson made his hands tighten on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Sycamore Street was in the older part of town, where the houses sat back from the road behind curtains of oak trees. Harold Wickham's house was easy to spot. It was the only one with lights on. And there in the driveway sat bus number 217, yellow paint gleaming wet under the streetlights. O'Connor radioed for backup, then sat in his car for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years, studying the house. It looked normal enough. Single-story ranch style, well-maintained lawn, even a little garden gnome by the front steps. The kind of house where a decent man might live alone, bothering nobody, contributing to his community. But O'Connor had learned long ago that evil rarely announces itself with dramatic flourishes. More often than not, it wore a friendly face and lived behind white picket fences. He approached the front door with his hand resting on his service weapon, though he prayed he wouldn't need to use it. Not with a child potentially in the line of fire. The doorbell echoed through the house, followed by the sound of movement inside. Heavy footsteps, a door closing, then more movement. Harold Wickham answered the door with a smile that seemed perfectly natural, perfectly normal. He was a man in his 50s, average height and build, wearing a cardigan sweater and house slippers. If you'd seen him at the grocery store or the post office, you wouldn't have looked twice. "Officer O'Connor, what brings you out on this nasty night?" "Evening, Harold. We got a 911 call from this address." "Everything all right?" Harold's smile never wavered, but O'Connor caught the slightest tightening around his eyes. "A 911 call? That's strange. I've been home all evening. Haven't had any emergencies. Must be some kind of mix-up. Mind if I come in and take a look around?" "Just to be thorough." Of course, of course." Harold stepped back, gesturing O'Connor inside. "Though I'm not sure what you're looking for." The house smelled like coffee and cleaning supplies, with an underlying odor that O'Connor couldn't quite identify. Something sweet and cloying that made his stomach turn. "Harold, you drive bus number 217, is that right?" "That's right. 15 years this December. Any of your kids on the bus today? Anyone who might have come home with you?" Harold's laugh was just a beat too quick, too forced. "Come home with me?" "Officer, that would be highly inappropriate. I drop all my children off at their designated stops, just like I'm supposed to." Children, not kids, not students, children. Something about the way Harold said that word made O'Connor's skin crawl. "So if I were to search this house, I wouldn't find any children here?" "Of course not." "Why would you?" The sound came from somewhere deeper in the house. A soft thump, like something falling. Both men heard it, and O'Connor watched Harold's face carefully. What was that? Probably just the cat. He's always knocking things over. But O'Connor didn't see any cat toys, didn't smell a litter box, didn't see any of the telltale signs of pet ownership. What he did see was a thin smear of something on Harold's sweater, something that looked suspiciously like crayon wax. "Harold, I'm going to need you to step outside while I search the premises. Now wait just a minute." "You can't just—actually I can." We have a report of a child in distress at this address. That gives me probable cause. O'Connor's backup arrived as he was leading Harold out to the front porch. 3 more patrol cars, their red and blue lights painting the quiet street in emergency colors. The search didn't take long. Emma was found in Harold's bedroom closet, curled up behind a row of hanging coats, like a small animal trying to hide from a predator. She was still fully clothed, thank God, but her eyes held a hollowness that spoke of violations beyond the physical. O'Connor knelt down at the closet entrance, making himself as small and non-threatening as possible. "Emma, my name is Officer O'Connor. You called 911, remember? You were very brave." Emma's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Is Grandmama?" "Here. She's on her way, sweetheart. Are you hurt? Do you need a doctor?" Emma shook her head, then changed her mind and nodded. He touched me, and he made me touch him. And he said if I told anyone, bad things would happen to Grandmama. O'Connor felt rage rise in his chest like a living thing, hot and demanding. But he kept his voice gentle, kept his movements slow and careful. "Emma, what Harold told you isn't true. Nothing bad is going to happen to your grandmother. And what he did to you was wrong. It was never your fault, not even a little bit." By the time Dot arrived, sirens wailing and tears streaming down her face, Harold Wickham was already in the mech, back of a patrol car. He maintained his innocence, claimed it was all a misunderstanding, insisted that Emma was a troubled child prone to fantasies. But the evidence told a different story. The investigation that followed would shake Millfield to its foundation. What started with one little girl's desperate 911 call quickly expanded into something much larger, much more horrifying than anyone had imagined. Emma's medical examination revealed evidence of sexual assault, not just recent, but ongoing. The doctor who performed the exam, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chun, who specialized in pediatric trauma cases, was gentle but thorough. "The physical evidence suggests this has been happening for some time," she told O'Connor quietly, out of Emma's hearing. "Weeks, possibly months. How is that possible? How did nobody notice? Children are amazingly resilient. They adapt. They survive. They find ways to cope. But the psychological damage..." Dr. Chun shook her head. "This little girl is going to need years of therapy to work through what's been done to her." Word of Harold's arrest spread through Millfield like wildfire, and the reactions were as varied as they were intense. Some people were shocked and horrified, ready to believe the worst of a man they trusted with their children. Others refused to accept it, insisting there had to be some mistake, some explanation that would restore their faith in the man who'd driven their kids to school every day for 15 years. But as the investigation deepened, more truth came to light. O'Connor and his team found a disturbing collection in Harold's bedroom. Photographs of children, not explicit, but troubling in their focus. Pictures taken during field trips, during bus rides, during school events. Always children. Always taken when the kids weren't aware they were being photographed. There was more. A journal, hidden in a shoebox in Harold's closet, filled with detailed observations about various students. Their schedules, their home situations, their personalities. Pages and pages of notes about which children seemed lonely, which ones came from troubled homes, which ones might be less likely to tell if something happened to them. Emma's name appeared dozens of times. Harold had been watching her, studying her, grooming her for months before he made his move. "Lives with grandmother," one entry read. No parents in picture. Shy, artistic, seeks approval from adults. Grandmother. Works long hours. Perfect candidate. Perfect candidate. Those words would echo in O'Connor's mind for years to come. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source: other children. Once word got out about Emma's brave call, other parents started paying closer attention to their kids' behavior, started asking harder questions about sudden personality changes, unexplained fears, drawings that didn't make sense. Sandra Kowalski brought Tommy to the police station 2 days after Harold's arrest. The 9-year-old was pale and shaking, but determined to tell his story. He said it was our special secret. Tommy whispered to the child psychologist who interviewed him. He said if I told anybody, they wouldn't believe me because I was just a kid and he was a grown-up. Tommy's account was heartbreakingly similar to Emma's. The long bus rides, the stops at Harold's house, the warnings about keeping secrets. The difference was that Harold had been working on Tommy for over a year, gradually escalating the abuse until Tommy had learned to simply endure it in silence. More children came forward, 7 in total, ranging in age from 6 to 11, all from Harold's bus route. All children who fit his preferred profile. Quiet kids from troubled homes, kids whose parents worked long hours or struggled with their own demons, kids who might not be believed if they tried to speak up. The pattern was clear, methodical, predatory. Harold Wickham had turned bus number 217 into a hunting ground, and the children of Millfield had been his prey. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came when O'Connor decided to dig into Harold's employment history. 15 years in Millfield, everyone said. A pillar of the community. A man above reproach. Except Harold hadn't started his career in Millfield. Before coming to their small town, he'd worked in 3 other school districts across the state. And in each one, he'd left under mysterious circumstances. Budget cuts, the official records claimed. Or seeking new opportunities. But when O'Connor called and spoke to administrators who'd actually worked with Harold, a different picture emerged. There were concerns, admitted Ellen Crawford, who had been a principal in Harold's previous district. Nothing concrete. You understand. Just ... concerns. Some children seemed uncomfortable around him. A few parents asked if their kids could ride different buses. We never had any formal complaints, but you were relieved when he left? A long pause. Yes, we were. The same story, repeated 3 times across 3 districts. Harold would work for a few years. Rumors would start to circulate. Parents would become uncomfortable, and then Harold would quietly move on to a new town, a new job, a fresh hunting ground. And each time, the previous employers had been so relieved to be rid of their suspicions that they provided glowing references, passing the problem along rather than dealing with it themselves. How many children might have been spared if someone had been brave enough to speak up years ago? O'Connor wondered aloud to his wife one night, staring at the ceiling and unable to sleep. You can't think like that, she told him. All you can do is make sure it stops now. But the guilt of all those missed opportunities, all those children who might have been protected if adults had listened to their instincts, would weigh on everyone involved in the case. News of Harold Wickham's crimes sent shockwaves through Millfield that reached far beyond the immediate families involved. This was a small town where everyone knew everyone, where children rode bicycles without helmets, and neighbors left their doors unlocked. The idea that a predator had been living among them, trusted with their most precious possessions for 15 years, shattered the community's sense of safety and trust. The division started almost immediately. On one side were the believers' parents, like Dot and Sandra, who looked at the evidence and saw a clear pattern of abuse. They organized support groups for the affected families, pushed for policy changes at the school, and demanded answers about how Harold had been allowed to operate undetected for so long. On the other side were the deniers people who had known Harold for years, who had trusted him with their own children, who couldn't reconcile the mild-mannered bus driver they knew with the monster the police were describing. Harold Wickham coached my son's Little League team. one parent said at a heated school board meeting. He helped organize the Christmas toy drive every year. This doesn't make sense. Those children are troubled. Another voice added from the back of the room. Look at their backgrounds. Emma Patterson doesn't even have parents. Tommy Kowalski's father is a drunk. Maybe they're making all this up for attention. The suggestion that 7 children had somehow conspired to falsely accuse Harold was absurd on its face, but it gained traction among people desperate to believe. But their world hadn't been as dangerous as it appeared. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, the child psychologist brought in to evaluate the victims, tried to educate the community about the realities of child sexual abuse. Children don't lie about things. Like this, she explained at a packed town hall meeting. The details they've provided, the consistency of their accounts, the physical evidence, it all points to a systematic pattern of abuse. But Harold's been here for 15 years, someone called out. Why didn't anyone say anything before? Because that's how predators operate. They choose victims who are unlikely to report, and they use psychological manipulation to ensure silence. These children were threatened, told they wouldn't be believed, made to feel complicit in their own abuse. Dr. Hayes pulled up a slide, showing statistics about child sexual abuse. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will experience sexual abuse before their 18th birthday. The average child tells 3 adults before one believes them. And in 90% of cases, the perpetrator is someone known and trusted by the family. The numbers were staggering, but they didn't seem to penetrate the wall of denial that had grown up around Harold's supporters. Statistics are one thing, argued Margaret Walsh, whose daughter had ridden Harold's bus for 3 years without incident. But Harold sang in our church choir. He volunteered at the senior center. Monsters don't do those things. Actually, Dr. Hayes replied gently, they often do. Predators frequently engage in community service and charitable work. It provides them with access to victims and helps establish their reputation as trustworthy individuals. The divide in the community grew wider and more bitter as the weeks passed. Families who had been friends for decades found themselves on opposite sides of an impossible chasm. Children caught in the middle didn't understand why some adults were angry at their friends, why playdates were suddenly canceled, why the grown-ups whispered and stopped talking when kids entered the room. Emma, meanwhile, was trying to heal from wounds that ran deeper than anyone could see. The physical injuries would fade, but the psychological trauma was like a shadow that followed her everywhere. She stopped speaking for 2 weeks after Harold's arrest, communicating only through nods and headshakes and the occasional drawing. Dot took leave from her job at the diner to care for her granddaughter full-time. Money was tighter than it had ever been, but she would have lived in a cardboard box before leaving Emma alone for even a minute. She wakes up screaming most nights, Dot told Dr. Hayes during one of their sessions. Dreams about being trapped on the bus, dreams about Harold coming to get her. Last night she asked me if it was her fault, if she did something to make him want to hurt her. Dr. Hayes's heart broke a little more with each case she handled, but she kept her voice steady and professional. That's very common. Children often blame themselves because it gives them a sense of control. If they caused it, then they can prevent it from happening again. What do I tell her? The truth. That none of this was her fault. That Harold was a sick man who made terrible choices. That she was brave to call for help. And that you will never, ever let anyone hurt her again. But even as Dot struggled to help Emma heal, she found herself fighting battles on multiple fronts. Her phone rang constantly, reporters wanting interviews, neighbors offering support or expressing doubt, lawyers explaining legal procedures she didn't understand. The worst calls came from Harold's defenders. Your granddaughter is destroying a good man's life. One voice hissed through the phone line at 2 in the morning. Harold Wickham is a pillar of this community, and you're letting that little liar ruin him." Dot hung up, but the calls kept coming. Someone spray-painted LIAR across her front door. Her car tires were slashed twice. The harassment got so bad that O'Connor assigned a patrol car to drive by her house every few hours. "Why are they doing this?" Emma asked one day, watching through the curtains as their neighbor Mrs. Peterson walked past without waving, the way she had every morning. For 3 years. Dot struggled to find an answer that a 7-year-old could understand. Sometimes when something scary happens, people don't want to believe it. It's easier for them to think you're making it up than to accept that someone they trusted did bad things. But I'm not making it up. I know, sugar. I know. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for December 15th, just 10 days before Christmas. Harold's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man from the state capitol, had been preparing a defense based on the troubled children, unreliable witnesses theory that had gained popularity among Harold's supporters. These are children from broken homes, he would argue. Children with histories of behavioral problems, children who have been coached by adults with their own agendas. My client is an innocent man being railroaded by hysteria. But Harold's lawyer hadn't counted on the physical evidence. The photographs, the journal filled with predatory observations. Most damaging of all, he hadn't counted on the testimony of Dr. Michael Reed, a forensic psychologist who had spent decades studying criminal behavior. Dr. Reed took the stand on a cold Tuesday morning and methodically destroyed Harold's carefully constructed facade. The defendant's journal shows clear evidence of what we call grooming behavior, he explained to the packed courtroom. He systematically identified vulnerable children, studied their routines and psychological profiles, and developed strategies for isolating and manipulating them. Harold sat at the defense table in his best suit, looking for all the world like a respectable middle-aged man who had somehow gotten caught up in a terrible misunderstanding. But his calm mask slipped when Dr. Reed began reading excerpts from the journal. Page 43. Emma responded well to compliments about her drawings. Shows signs of seeking adult approval. Grandmother works until 6 most days, making after-school opportunities viable. A gasp went up from the gallery. Dot felt her hands clench into fists. Page 67. Tommy is more resistant than expected. May need to increase isolation. Time and gifts to secure compliance. Consider using Emma as leverage. He seems protective of younger children. More gasps. Sandra Kowalski put her face in her hands. This document, Dr. Reed continued, represents what forensic psychologists call a hunting journal. It's a detailed record of predatory behavior, showing clear intent and premeditation. Harold's lawyer tried to object, tried to claim the journal was taken out of context, but the damage was done. The man sitting at the defense table was no longer the beloved bus driver who sang in the church choir. He was a predator who had spent years studying children the way a hunter studies prey. The hearing lasted 3 days. 7 children took the stand, each one braver than anyone had a right to expect. Emma's testimony was the last and most devastating. She wore her best dress, the blue one, with little flowers that Dot had bought for her 7th birthday, and clutched a stuffed rabbit that Dr. Hayes had given her. When the prosecutor asked her to describe what Harold had done to her, her voice was so quiet that the judge had to ask her to speak louder. "He said it was our special game," Emma whispered, her words carrying across the silent courtroom like ripples across still water. "He said I was his favorite, and if I was good and didn't tell, he would give me presents. But if I told, bad things would happen to Grandmama." "What kind of bad things?" He said she might get hurt, or she might not want me anymore if she knew I was bad." "Did you believe him?" Emma nodded, tears streaming down her small face. "I didn't want Grandmama to get hurt because of me." The prosecutor, a woman named Jennifer Lawson, who had prosecuted dozens of child abuse cases, kept her questions simple and direct. She knew that the jury was watching not just Emma's words, but her body language, her obvious distress, the way she unconsciously moved away from Harold, even though he was seated 20 feet away. "Emma, when you called 911 that day, were you telling the truth?" "Yes." "Are you telling the truth now?" "Yes." "Is there anything you want to say to Mr. Wickham?" Emma looked directly at Harold for the first time since entering the courtroom. Her small chin lifted with a courage that made grown men weep. "You were wrong," she said clearly. "You were wrong to hurt me, and Tommy, and the other kids. And you were wrong when you said nobody would believe us." Harold Wickham was bound over for trial on 17 counts of child sexual abuse. The trial began on February 14th, 2012, Valentine's Day, a date that struck many as cruelly ironic given the nature of the crimes being prosecuted. The courthouse was packed every day, with victims' families on one side and Harold's remaining supporters on the other, like a wedding gone horribly wrong. Harold had hired a new lawyer for the trial, a man named Richard Stone, who specialized in defending the indefensible. Stone's strategy was clear from his opening statement: attack the credibility of the child witnesses, suggest that overzealous investigators had coached their testimony, and paint Harold as a victim of mass hysteria. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Stone said, his voice smooth as silk, "you're going to hear some disturbing testimony over the next few weeks. But I ask you to remember that accusations are not facts. That children can be influenced by adult suggestion. That in our rush to judgment, we may be destroying an innocent man's life." Prosecutor Jennifer Lawson's opening was starkly different. "Over the next 2 weeks, you're going to meet 7 of the bravest children you'll ever encounter. Children who found the courage to speak truth to power, to break the silence that their abuser demanded of them. And you're going to see evidence, physical evidence, photographic evidence, written evidence that proves beyond any reasonable doubt that the defendant used his position of trust to prey upon the most vulnerable members of our community." The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They started with the physical evidence, the photographs found in Harold's house, his journal with its predatory observations, the results of the children's medical examinations. Dr. Chun testified about Emma's injuries, explaining to the jury in clinical terms what those injuries meant. Her testimony was hard to hear, but harder to dismiss. The pattern of trauma is consistent with repeated sexual assault over a period of several months, she said, her professional composure never wavering, even as spectators in the gallery openly wept. O'Connor took the stand and walked the jury through the investigation, the discovery of Harold's employment history, the pattern of suspicious departures from previous jobs. In each district where Mr. Wickham worked, there were concerns about his interactions with children. But those concerns were never formally investigated. Instead, he was allowed to quietly move on to the next job, the next group of potential victims. The testimony that followed was heartbreaking. 7 children, ages 6 to 11, took the stand and described in their own words what Harold had done to them. Their accounts were consistent in all the important details, varying only in the specific ways that real memories vary. Tommy Kowalski, now 10 years old, spoke about the fear he'd lived with for over a year. He said if I told anybody, he would make sure I got in trouble at school. He said nobody would believe a kid like me anyway, because my dad drinks too much. 8-year-old Sarah Chun, no relation to Dr. Chun, described how Harold had used her love of animals against her. He said he had a sick puppy at his house that needed medicine, and if I came with him, I could help take care of it. But there was no puppy. There was never a puppy. Each testimony was more damning than the last, but it was Emma's second time on the stand that truly sealed Harold's fate. She was 8 now, having had her birthday during the long months between the preliminary hearing and the trial. She seemed smaller than ever in the witness chair, but her voice was steady as she answered Prosecutor Lawson's questions. "Emma, do you remember what Mr. Wickham told you about keeping secrets?" "He said it was our special secret, and that special secrets were different from bad secrets. He said special secrets made people feel good, but if I told anybody, it would stop being special and become bad." "What did you think about that?" "I was confused, because it didn't make me feel good. It made me feel scared and dirty. But he said that was normal, and that I would understand when I was older." "When you called 911 that day, were you scared?" "Yes, but I was more scared of what might happen to other kids if I didn't tell." That answer, spoken by an 8-year-old child who had found the courage to protect others even while drowning in her own trauma, resonated through the courtroom like a bell tolling. Stone's cross-examination of the children was aggressive, but carefully controlled. He couldn't afford to appear to be bullying child witnesses, but he needed to plant seeds of doubt about their reliability. "Emma, you've talked to a lot of grown-ups about what happened, haven't you? Police officers, doctors, lawyers?" "Yes." "And they've asked you to tell this story many times?" "Yes. Sometimes when we tell a story over and over, it changes a little bit each time." "Do you think that might have happened here?" Emma considered this seriously, the way children do when adults ask them important questions. "No," she said finally. "I remember what happened because it happened to me. It's not a story." Stone tried the same approach with each child witness, but their answers remained consistent. These weren't coached testimonies or false memories implanted by overzealous investigators. These were real children describing real trauma in their own words. The defense case was brief and largely ineffective. Stone called character witnesses who testified about Harold's volunteer work, his clean driving record, his contributions to the community. But their testimony felt hollow in the face of the evidence. Harold himself chose not to testify, exercising his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. But his silence spoke volumes to a jury that had spent 2 weeks listening to children find their voices. In his closing argument, Stone made one last desperate appeal. "Ladies and gentlemen, we live in an age of hysteria about child abuse. We see predators everywhere, danger in every interaction between adults and children. In our zeal to protect our kids, are we destroying innocent men? Harold Wickham devoted his life to serving this community, and now his reputation lies in ruins." Based on the testimony of troubled children, who may have been influenced by well-meaning but misguided adults, Prosecutor Lawson's closing was simple and direct. The defendant asks you to believe that 7 children from different families, different backgrounds, different age groups, somehow conspired to tell identical lies about him. He asks you to ignore the physical evidence, the photographs, the journal, where he documented his hunting strategies. He asks you to believe that this is all a terrible misunderstanding. But children don't lie about things like this. Children don't make up detailed accounts of sexual abuse. Children don't subject themselves to invasive medical examinations and traumatic court testimony for attention or revenge. These children told the truth. They deserve justice. And Harold Wickham deserves to be held accountable for what he's done. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice was steady as he read the verdict. On count 1, sexual abuse of a minor, we find the defendant guilty. 17 times the word guilty echoed through the courthouse. 17 counts, 7 children, 1 predator finally brought to justice. Harold Wickham was sentenced to 45 years in prison without the possibility of parole. At 54 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. As the bailiff led Harold away in shackles, he looked back at the packed courtroom one last time. His eyes found Emma, sitting between Dot and Dr. Hayes, and for a moment his mask of respectability slipped entirely. The look he gave her was pure hatred, the rage of a predator whose hunting days were over. But Emma didn't look away. She met his gaze with the steady courage of a child who had survived hell and lived to tell about it. Now, friend, I've been telling you this story for the better part of an hour, and I imagine you might be wondering how I know all these details so clearly, how I can speak with such certainty about the thoughts and feelings of folks I ain't never mentioned meeting. Well, the truth is, I was there. Not in the courtroom every day, you understand, but in the thick of it all the same. You? See, I'm Emma's great-grandfather. Dot's daddy, the old man who taught her to pray on her knees and trust in the Lord's justice, even when that justice moves slower than molasses in January. I watched my granddaughter struggle to protect her child, watched her fight battles on fronts she never should have had to face. I saw Emma transform from a broken little bird into a warrior who found strength in truth-telling. And I witnessed a community torn apart by its refusal to see evil hiding in plain sight. It's been more than a decade now since Harold Wickham was led away in chains. Emma's grown into a beautiful young woman, studying to be a counselor so she can help other children find their voices. Tommy Kowalski joined the police force, following in Officer O'Connor's footsteps. The other children have gone on to build lives that their abuser never wanted them to have. Millfield changed after the trial. New policies, better training, more thorough background checks. But more than that, the community learned to listen when children speak, learned that monsters don't always look like monsters, and that the people we trust the most can sometimes be the ones who hurt us worst. Harold died in prison 3 years ago. Heart attack, they said. Can't say I mourned his passing, though I did pray for his soul. We're all God's children, even the broken ones who choose evil over good. But this story ain't really about Harold Wickham. It's about Emma Grace Patterson, a 7-year-old girl who found the courage to dial 3 numbers and speak 5 words that changed everything. The bus driver did it again. It's about the power of truth, spoken by small voices that cut through years of willful blindness. It's about the responsibility we all have to listen when children try to tell us they're in danger. And it's about the fact that evil might hide in familiar faces and friendly smiles. But truth has a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deep we try to bury it. You know, folks ask me sometimes if I'm proud of Emma for speaking up that day. And I always tell them the same thing. I'm not proud of her for being brave. I'm proud of her for surviving, for healing, for choosing to turn her pain into purpose. But mostly, I'm proud that when the world tried to silence her, she found a way to make herself heard. Because that's what heroes do, friend. They speak truth in the darkness, even when their voices shake with fear, especially then. So the next time you hear a small voice trying to tell you something that seems impossible, something that challenges your faith in the people you trust, ... Remember little Emma Patterson. Remember that courage don't come in sizes, and truth don't always wear the clothes we expect. Listen to the children. They see things we've trained ourselves to ignore. And never, ever let anyone convince you that their pain is less important than our comfort. That's the lesson Millfield learned the hard way, and it's one the rest of us would do well to remember. Because somewhere out there right now, another child is trying to find the courage to speak. Another small voice is whispering in the dark, hoping someone will hear. Will you listen? Or will you wait for another 911 call to break the silence? The choice, friend, is yours. But choose wisely, because little voices carry big truths, and the cost of not listening, well, that's a price too high for any of us to pay. Now I've kept you long enough. Take what you will from this old man's tale. But remember Emma Grace Patterson, and remember, that even the smallest voice can change the world, if we're brave enough to listen. It's been more than a decade now since Harold Wickham was led away in chains. Emma's grown into a beautiful young woman, studying to be a counselor so she can help other children find their voices. Tommy Kowalski joined the police force, following in Officer O'Connor's footsteps. The other children have gone on to build lives that their abuser never wanted them to have. Millfield changed after the trial. New policies, better training, more thorough background checks. But more than that, the community learned to listen when children speak, learned that monsters don't always look like monsters, and that the people we trust the most can sometimes be the ones who hurt us worst. Harold died in prison 3 years ago. Heart attack, they said. Can't say I mourned his passing, though I did pray for his soul. We're all God's children, even the broken ones who choose evil over good. But this story ain't really about Harold Wickham. It's about Emma Grace Patterson, a 7-year-old girl who found the courage to dial 3 numbers and speak 5 words that changed everything. The bus driver did it again. It's about the power of truth, spoken by small voices that cut through years of willful blindness. It's about the responsibility we all have to listen when children try to tell us they're in danger. And it's about the fact that evil might hide in familiar faces and friendly smiles. But truth has a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deep we try to bury it. You know, folks ask me sometimes if I'm proud of Emma for speaking up that day. And I always tell them the same thing. I'm not proud of her for being brave. I'm proud of her for surviving, for healing, for choosing to turn her pain into purpose. But mostly, I'm proud that when the world tried to silence her, she found a way to make herself heard. Because that's what heroes do, friend. They speak truth in the darkness, even when their voices shake with fear, especially then. So the next time you hear a small voice trying to tell you something that seems impossible, something that challenges your faith in the people you trust, ... Remember little Emma Patterson. Remember that courage don't come in sizes, and truth don't always wear the clothes we expect. Listen to the children. They see things we've trained ourselves to ignore. And never, ever let anyone convince you that their pain is less important